Well, hello everyone. I'm excited to be here in person. It's like it's a different experience online than in person. So, well, I'm DeLonn Crosby with SayKid, and I'm going to talk with you about how to build an award-winning product without raising venture capital. And as I was thinking about the title of this, I was actually thinking like maybe I set your expectations too high, because this easily could have also been called how to build a really ugly product without knowing how to sew. So that said, this is actually our first kind of prototype. This is what it looks like now. And you know, in terms of what we do, we really combine voice technology with tangible play to help kids learn in an interactive way without screens. Now, you might be wondering, why does that matter? Well, if you think about like the iPad, a lot of kids see in front of screens and iPad. Going back 10 years ago, Steve Jobs was being interviewed for an article with the New York Times, and the reporter said, "Hey, your kids must love the iPad." And he's like, "No, actually, we haven't really given it to them." And the reporter was surprised, but I think it sort of says something. Either Steve Jobs is an idiot, or I think as a culture, I think we need to really relook at kind of what our priorities are. If we're being honest, most technology was never designed for kids. Touch interfaces aren't really natural for them. These like rigid form factors aren't very playful. And excessive screen time can actually hurt their development. So what we've done is we combined, like I said, voice technology in the form factor of a plush robot to help kids really play to learn. But you'll find out we're also trying to help adults also learn how to play. So you might think of us as a conversational AI company, because that's what I would say we do best. But this is what it looks like, and we'll talk more about some of the learnings. We have won some awards, but we're not going to talk about the awards. We're going to talk more about some of the lessons that we've learned along the way, because a lot of the lessons have been really surprising to me, and a lot of them have come from kids. So before I get into that, let me actually show you how it works.
Do smart and smart. Start with the letters SM or SH. You've been working hard. Let's try another. Do stone and story. Start with the letters ST or SH. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. 10 in a row. Way to go.
So that's my son Cal, and that game actually it won the grand prize in the Amazon Alexa EdTech Challenge not too long ago. Like I said, we won some awards. We've also lost a lot of things as well. But I want to take you back to my very first Twin Cities Startup Week, and I ran into a venture capitalist. Her name's Kathy Kinnett. She's a really good friend now. And we were at some event, and she gave me some feedback that I had never heard before. And at the time, I really didn't know much about anything. I'd been in mainly kind of corporate world. I had been involved in a couple tech companies, but she said to me, think about your fundraising strategy as you do your product strategy. And it really challenged me, because the product strategy is really simple. Every decision we make is through the lens of what's best for a child. And as I started to think about her advice, I started to really ask myself, what are the trade-offs? With any sort of product, you're always going to have trade-offs, right? And we've been thinking a lot about the trade-offs with the development of the ToyBot. And I got thinking, if we were to go to this path in terms of fundraising, and there's lots of different ways to get resources, how would that change the development of the product, right? So as many of you know, the name of the game in venture capital is mainly to get as big as possible, as fast as possible. And that works great for a lot of certain situations, for a lot of companies, at different times, right? And so, but how it made me think is I just wanted to have that sort of pressure test of, would it allow us to still do what we wanted to do and make every decision through the lens of what's in the best interest of a child? And that's kind of the main reason why we haven't raised funding, or venture capital, I would say. But it also encouraged me to think about why. And so SayKid really got started a few years ago when my son was 4 years old. At the time, he was a happy little 4-year-old. He loved school. In fact, he loved school so much that he even named his pet fish after his teacher, Mr. Barr, by the way. And then one day, Mr. Barr left, like a lot of early educators do. And the teacher that replaced him didn't have the same tools or training to relate to my son. You know, happy grams turned into these nasty grams, which then ultimately led to this voicemail.
Hi, Don. I've been with Cal most of the day today, and he's totally out of control, disrespectful, disobedient. I need you to come and get him, and he is not going to return. I hope you understand. Thank you. Bye.
So as a type A person, that was a really, really hard time because there was nothing I could actually do about it. In the US, you know, a lot of early educator programs, you know, have like 13-month wait lists, so it's not like we could just go to a different program. And you know, my kid was really having a hard time. He started to sort of not trust adults, teachers, and it was crazy to see the dramatic impact that you know, a teacher had. And you know, he's had great teachers, but it's also made me realize, like, wow, you know, a teacher really, really can impact the life of a child. And so I really felt helpless. Like there wasn't a lot that I could do, but what I could control is I could figure out, you know, what can I do to educate myself on what kids need to succeed and how to develop it. And so I spent a lot of time. What ended up happening is I wanted to try to find another place, and I couldn't. So I spent months just calling around. Do you have availability? No, we don't. And then as soon as, of course, you tell them that, you know, your son was kicked out of preschool, it's like the fastest way to not get called back. So, but I finally found one place, and they basically said to me, hey, there's a spot, but there was like an asterisk. The asterisk was he could only have it if I joined. And I don't know if they said it to me because they didn't want to give him the spot or, you know, whatever, but I said, okay, cool, I'll do it. So I literally went back to preschool. But I learned a ton, and I learned things that I would have never learned any other place. And I think that's, you know, coming from kind of the corporate world, you can really learn a lot from kids. And I had sort of never thought about it. You know, kids speak kid language, kids use kid logic, and so this is a picture of me, you know, hanging out in a preschool classroom. But as I started to get into it, I realized, like, wow, you know, this is not working. As I mentioned before, early educators turnover, about 50% turnover every year. So if you think about like growing a business, imagine if you're trying to grow a business and 50% of your staff leave, right? Think about that. Now think about what that might do to a brain. I just didn't even think about these things. And when you get an education, you realize how important relationships are. I mean, people would say it's like the most important part of education. But the truth is that more than 90% of the brain is formed before kindergarten. But more than 90% of funding comes after kindergarten. So in my mind, it's truly a broken model. And you know, lesson number one for me is start with truth. You know, we can do all this stuff and ed tech, whatever, but unless we're really serious about the problems, then we're not going to be able to really fix them. And so this was sort of eye-opening for me, and it sort of set the expectation, like, wow, this is going to be really hard, but we'll see where we go. And so as I mentioned, things are going to be really hard. And by the way, the solution here is not to just replace teachers with robots. I just want everybody to know that. The solution, in a nutshell, is like, how do we help adults? How do we help adults be the best teachers that our kids need them to be? That's the summary. But as I was thinking about this, we had a teacher. When Cal was getting ready to go to kindergarten, we wanted to meet with his new teacher, just to explain to her, like, hey, what's going on? Like, this is going to be hard. We wanted to set our expectations. And to be honest, I didn't really trust teachers then, you know, after the experience that we had gone through. And I wanted to make sure that, like, this was going to be the right environment. And I sort of laid out all the sort of worst case scenarios of what could happen. You know, this could happen. What are you going to do? This could happen. And after hearing everything, she looked at us and she said, "I will never give up on your child." And I didn't really process it because we had kind of heard that before. And I said to her, I can't believe I said this now, but I'll tell you. I said to her, "You know what, you seem like a really, really nice person. But I don't believe you, I just don't." And she kind of looked at me like a kindergartner might look at, or a kindergarten teacher might look at a kid that just like, emptied the glue out or something, like with that look. And then she said to me, "I will do it takes." And she said exactly the thing that she needed to say for it to really click for me. Because what she didn't know is Cal actually has a younger brother. And so we were very intentional about naming Cal's younger brother. So what happened is in 2015, some of you may remember the name Jamar Clark. Unarmed African-American man was killed by a police officer. This is 2015, so well before George Floyd. And it led to some conversations between my wife and I about like, gosh, what's going on in this world, and what kind of environment are we bringing in a child into this world? I don't know. Maybe others that have kids have kind of gone through a similar thing, but we just realized, we had this kind of realization that, gosh, like we have had so many technological advances, but yet not a lot has really changed all that much, and we were starting to wonder why. And it wasn't because we lacked the answers. We know the answers. Today, we know exactly what kids need to succeed and how to develop it. We know that. But what we've really lacked is the will. That's it. And so we wanted a reminder for us to always make the right choices and do the right things. And so the second lesson I would say, if you're going to develop a cool product, is you're going to have to find your will. And so here's our will, and he's now 6 years old. So those are sort of the highest level. We'll get more deeper into specific kind of lessons. But at the time, like I wasn't sure if what we were doing is really possible. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about really building a robot that there's no screen, it's voice interactive. At the time, Alexa was just kind of starting to come out, and I remember like we started building a game, and it took us months to make a game, and it wasn't very good. I'll just tell you that. And but what we started to do is we started to realize, all right, what are the key things that we needed to de-risk? And I remember we took a really long time to make this first game, and I remember thinking like, gosh, we're going to die. We're going to total die if we weren't able to go faster. And I remember sort of having to sort of pressure test this. Like some folks I trusted were like, we can't go faster. And but if they're right, we were going to die. So it was really important that we tested this. And so I spent a weekend learning JavaScript and learning how to do different things. And I made a game that had nothing to do with education or helping kids learn, because that wasn't the point. The point was just to figure out if we can actually go faster. So let me show you the game that we made. It was called Magic Card Trick, and I'll show it to you. Open card trick.
Welcome to Card Trick. I will ask you to select a card and use my telepathic power to guess the card you selected. Are you ready to begin?
Yes.
Dealer, please shuffle the cards. Player, please take a moment to inspect the cards. Are they randomly shuffled?
Yes.
Great. Dealer, please fold the cards out face down. Player, please select a card. After you have selected a card, say bada bing, bada boom.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Excellent. Dealer, place the remaining cards face down. Player, place your card face up for dealer to verify. Are you ready for the final step?
Yes.
Finally, player, use your hands to make a camera. Point your camera toward your card and say abracadabra.
Abracadabra.
Dealer, when you are ready, you can ask me to reveal player's card.
Let us know which card was drawn.
Player selected the 8 of diamonds. Did I guess correctly?
Yes.
Woohoo!
I think that is crazy.
So I guess what I would say is that if you want to build a dope product, sometimes you just gotta, believe in magic as much as yourself. I didn't have really any technical skills, but I always wanted to kind of learn them, and I spent a day learning something, made it basically an MVP that didn't have anything to do with what we were doing, but it helped us learn, and so that's the lesson that I take away from that. All right, so moving on. All right, so I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I spent a lot of time getting deep in the science of child development and researching, and I came across this thing. It's basically in the realm of positive psychology. Do we need to pause? I'm being told to just use the mic. Is that the, all right. So if anybody's heard the term grit or the book Grit, Angela Duckworth is kind of rooted in positive psychology. But I was really deep in the research because I had to follow the truth. I didn't trust what I heard. I had to know for sure what works and what doesn't and how to develop that. And so I came across this acronym. It's called PERMA. I'd actually recommend, let me explain what it is first. So it stands for Positive, Engaged, Relationships, Meaning, and Achievement. And it's the science of how you create joy. That's it. So if you're building a product and you want to sort of design for joy, this is what you do. So make sure it's positive. Make sure people are engaged. Try to involve relationships. Make sure there's some kind of meaning, so not just random, and achievement as well. And it's kind of crazy that I don't hear it more often. It's in fact I think I've only ever heard one other person that knew what PERMA was, but it's literally the science of how you design for joy. So let me share with you an experience that we made that's trying to hit on all of those, and all of our experience, we're really trying to hit on all of them. But let me show you one. This is called the drawing game.
First, draw an upside-down triangle. Ready to move on? No!
Can you hear me?
Okay. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Ready for your next hint?
Yes!
Now, draw a cloud on top of the triangle.
A cloud? I already know what it is.
Ready for your next hint?
What?
Next, draw a tiny circle on top of the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Ready for your next clue?
Yes! I think it's ice cream.
For the final step, draw a small curved line on top of the tiny circle.
Yeah, that's
What do you think it is?
ice cream!
That was amazing. It's an ice cream cone. I just learned a new picture.
Yes! 1 point for me!
So I just think it's hilarious. So positive, engaged, relationships, meaning, and achievement. That's PERMA. But the lesson here is that on the left, this is Joy Lindsay. She's she's an angel investor here in Minnesota. She was our first customer, and I always thought it was kind of interesting because she didn't know this, but we designed for joy, and somehow joy found us. So I think that's the lesson. And so if you're building a product, design for joy, and joy might find you, like literally. All right, so let's move on. All right, has anybody heard of inversion thinking? Can I just get a show of hands? I'm trying to figure out how to go. Okay, cool. All right. Really, really powerful, not just with SayKid, but even in my past life. Inversion thinking is this idea of solving the opposite problem. So we're designed to help kids learn, all right? So imagine, what would you build if you wanted to make something that was designed to have kids not learn? Like, what would that look like? I'll throw out some ideas. Like, you might make it expensive, right? So kids couldn't afford it. You might make it, I mentioned how important relationships are. So you might make it get in the way of relationships. I don't know if there's early educators here, but all early skills are developed through back and forth interaction and by modeling behavior. So you might make something where, maybe, I don't know, kids are pushing buttons. Maybe they're staring at a screen. that's literally like how we would. So then the key to inversion thinking is doing the opposite. And it doesn't mean you couldn't have a kid learn, but you wouldn't sort of necessarily design it that way if we were to start all over. And with SayKid, we've really tried to ask ourselves, if we had to start all over, would we create it the same way? And I think the answer is no. And so that's really how we've tried to design it. And I'll tell you a quick story. We were testing one time. How we sort of figured this out was we made a game really early on. I think it had to do with manners. And I remember, this is my daughter Ella. I remember the Toybot sort of providing some scenario, and I think the kid said, you're welcome. And the Toybot said, no, that's wrong. You were supposed to say excuse me, or something like that. And it was because of a bug. It was just because of a bug. And at that point, I'm like, and my daughter, she's like, hey, Dad, I think it's trying to trick me. And I was like, wow. And at that point, I really realized how much of a responsibility we have to get this right. And conversational AI is still in kind of a nascent phase. Folks haven't figured out really how advanced it is and how helpful it can be. Like, we're still pretty early, but I think it may be the most impactful technology, education technology, that we have from an impact standpoint for what's possible. But with that comes responsibility, and I think it's really important that kids play the role of teacher, because as you start to get into social emotional skills and stuff like that, my biggest fear is that a robot would sort of coerce a kid on how to feel. Like, that's a really, really scary world. And I also think it's scary that for kids to interact with gendered voices, it's going to shape kids. And so I think we have to have a really high bar with how we interact with technology and kids. And I think that for us, what that led us to is actually having kids play the role of teacher. Now, what's interesting about that is that at the same time, we started to realize there's this thing called self-determination theory, which is basically the science of how do you foster a love of learning. And one of those things is about giving kids agency. And what's interesting, and also helping them feel successful and helping them feel like they belong. Those are the three key ingredients. But what's interesting is when you have kids play the role of teacher, they actually feel successful, right? Because robots don't have feelings. You can program a robot to not know its letters or whatever. And so that's been kind of a really interesting observation that came from inversion thinking. So the lesson here, I don't want to screw it up. All right, here we go. Let me show you what it looks like when kids play the role of teacher.
I love being 2 years old because every day I learn something new.
Is this good?
I also get free admission to the train museum. I'm curious. How old are you?
7.
Wow, you are so old. What's it like to be 7?
It's like you have to be the leader of everything.
I love that. But that was her perspective, and that was a game called What's It Like, where kids literally teach the Toybot what it's like to be different and how it feels to be a kid. We'll talk more about that in a second, but the lesson here is sometimes you just need to invert your thinking. All right, so let me share with you the toughest decision that we've made from a product perspective, and even as a company. So a couple years ago, we were getting ready to launch. We had a dope product. The demo was great. We had started selling it, and I started to get a little confident about it. And I would end presentations with, "Give me a reason why you wouldn't buy this." And then I went to visit a couple students, and I was testing with them. And at this point, I had tested with probably hundreds and hundreds of students. And every time it was kind of a similar experience. They enjoyed it, they were learning, and they were really engaged, actively engaged. So it was really fun to see. And this time, though, was different. One of the students, I was like, "Well, what did you think?" And she's like, "It's cool." And I'm like, and I hadn't seen that before. And I didn't want to push too hard. And I'm like, "Well, anything else?" And she just was like, "No, it's really cool." And I mean, she was totally faking it. She did not enjoy it. And what I found is that she actually couldn't hear out of one of her ears. So the product was great. But it really only worked well if you were close to it or if it was a really quiet environment. And I lost a lot of sleep about that because the business decision there was to just push forward, launch the product. We already demonstrated people will buy it. But what no one knew that I knew exactly what it felt like to have a kid that doesn't feel heard with my son. I knew that. And I was thinking about that, like, no one would have cared if we were to just push forward. But I knew that, and I didn't want to regret. I didn't want to have a regret, to be honest with you. And so we paused the launch, and we spent about 13 or 14 weeks redesigning we had to make everything different to make it twice as loud. But we did it, and to be honest, I wasn't sure it was possible, but we did it. And that was a really important moment for me, and especially from a product standpoint, because you got to find a way to listen, really listen. And I didn't realize how difficult that is. When you're an adult, you think, again, like you have adult logic. Kids have totally different logic. And I felt like I wasn't listening as well as I could. And the thing that I also thought is, like, what would happen if we went into a classroom and there's this student and every other kid could play, but she couldn't? To me, that was actually worse than maybe helping all of the other students. Like, that's how I thought about it. So we ended up making, so I thought, okay, cool, what can we do about it? We changed the product, but then we didn't stop there. We thought, all right, how might we help this kid feel heard? So we actually made an experience where kids teach the robot about, again, it's about empathy, but where a kid learns sign language through the robot. I'll show you.
Sometimes, robots that have a hard time hearing speak sign language. Would you like to try?
Yes.
Okay. First, touch your chest with one hand. Now, take your pointer fingers on both hands and hook them together. Finally, hook them again on the other side. You just said, "My friend in sign language." I can feel my empathy gauge starting to increase again.
All right, so to me, that sounds crazy, right? So you're building a product that's voice interactive, and you're teaching kids to learn sign language. But it's, I don't know, it's by listening and really listening, it's kind of opened up new things that we would have never thought about. And I have many, many stories about things that we do today that we would have never thought about that are just cool. So the lesson here is if you want to build a really great product, you have to find a way to really listen. The reason that was the toughest decision, but it also led to the biggest insight. So because we had the extra time, we pushed off the launch. We wanted to start testing in classrooms. And we had a really great partner, still have a great partner, who, large early childhood chain, and we wanted to basically see, could this help kids learn and be able to measure it, which is what you would typically want to do. And I remember onboarding some teachers, and there was one main teacher that was gonna use it to start. And it took us a little while to get going, and for some reason there was a delay, and I think it was on our side. And what ended up happening is when we sort of fixed whatever we were trying to work on, the teacher that we had onboarded had actually moved classroom. So think about going from like a 4.5-year-old classroom to a 3.5-year-old classroom, which is very different actually. And I didn't realize how different it was. But not only that, there was a kid that I had heard a lot about since we started working with this school. And the kid demonstrated just challenging behaviors. And I remember thinking to myself, like, one day, not unlike my kid, by the way, and I remember thinking, like, one day we'll be able to serve this kid. Not now, but eventually I want to get to the point where, like, we're going to be able to help this kid. And because we had the delay, the teacher changed classrooms, and now this child was actually going to be in the classroom. not only did we have this child that demonstrated kind of harder behaviors, but it was a younger classroom. So when you make voice technology, it's really important that kids can kind of speak, right, in sentences. So I was really worried about that, and I was also worried about the fact that the teacher actually had a very thick Sri Lankan accent. So if I were to sort of design this environment, it was not conducive to our very first test with this large early childhood chain, and we're kind of setting ourselves up to fail, to be honest with you. And I thought about like, gosh, should we do this? So I came in and I visited the classroom, and when I met this kid, let me just explain to you kind of the context. I came in early because I wanted to just observe, and I remember hearing this voice kind of come down the hall. There were some screams, and the door opened, and a parent, literally picked this kid up, threw him in the classroom. Like that was my first impression. And of course, this kid runs to the window and he watches his parent walk away. And it's sad, it was sad. But I wish I didn't realize like how much folks don't see about what goes on with kids these days. It was eye-opening for me. So my instinct was to just kind of get to know this kid. And when I tried to get to know him, he hit me, literally hit me, threw the toy bot, and I realized, wow, we're toast. Like, we are so toast. We're not going to be able to measure any, academic outcomes. And so we said timeout, and we paused the pilot. And at the time, we were making all of our games sort of mainly like one way. So kid plays the role of teacher, it's kind of one way. But because we had doubled how loud the product could be, we now could actually play in groups, which, by the way, is a lot of how kids learn in early childhood education. And so we paused and we changed all of the games that we had at the time that we were going to be testing. We made them all into group games. And the job to be done, and I'll describe what I mean by that, was no longer to measure outcomes in terms of academic skills. The job to be done was really help this kid feel like he belongs. That was it. After the first week, so at the time he wasn't really joining groups. And after the first week, he joined the group. And we thought it was like the biggest win. And I got to know him, and we actually made a game just for him, like just for him. And we've done that since then. But I was really excited about the fact that he could now join a group. And I had, through my own experience, I've seen how somehow teachers would handle, I would say, children that demonstrate harder behavior. Sometimes it's easy. When adults are uncomfortable, we want to try to control the situation. And oftentimes we'll be like, okay, go do this, go join the group. But what happens is when we do that, we take away their agency, which kind of hurts their love of learning, if you will. And the teacher was phenomenal. I mean, she was amazing. But ultimately, this kid joined the group. And then after the second week, he was able to demonstrate what we would call a multi-turn interaction, where he could sort of respond back and forth with the toy bot. And I didn't mention this, but when I first met him, his brain was going like a million miles an hour. Like it was almost like he spoke in kind of run-on sentences. And I was just so, I didn't know at the time, like from an academic standpoint, like what was going on in terms of brain development, but we could demonstrate that he could model a conversational turn, which was great. And after the third week, I came in and I would come in and meet the classroom, and I remember very distinctly after the third week, he just came and gave me the biggest hug. And I always think about that, like, the words are cool, the traction's cool, but of all the things that we've done or played a small role in, that's the thing I think a lot about. And it's really a credit to the teacher, because she understood what he needed and also how to use a tool to help with it. And one of the ahas, and I'll show you how we did it, but what I didn't realize is that when a kid says, pass me to a friend, if a teacher were to say that, the teacher's taking away if a teacher were to say that, the teacher's taking away the kid's agency. But if a toy is like, hey, pass me to a friend that you haven't played with, the kid that's playing just feels like they're playing. But the kid that wasn't included feels like $1 million. That was sort of the learning here. So let me show you what this would look like.
Would you rather play a zither?
It's a simple would you rather game.
Or a xylophone?
Zither.
That was a tough one. Give me a hug as you pass me. Would you rather own a harmonica? Or a guitar?
A Monica.
That was an easy one.
So most people would look at this as just a game. But a teacher, a really strong, trained teacher, will look at this as a way to build relationships. Because what happened there, and by the way, my wife's a kindergarten teacher, what happened there is, she just figured out what this kid's interested in. Interested in fire trucks or a zither or whatever. A teacher can build on that in a way that it's kind of sneaky, but it works. And especially if you're a kid that doesn't trust adults or had a bad experience with a teacher, this is a really good means to engage that child and do it in a developmentally appropriate way. So the lesson here, I call it sort of solve the job to be done. And by the way, I think this is not only the best product lesson, but maybe the best business lesson I've ever learned. But it's really easy to sort of think about a problem and solve it in a very literal way. But when I think about job to be done, we all hire products to do a job. For example, if we're trying to build something, you're really trying to make a 1/4-inch hole, but a drill, you can buy a drill. But the job to be done is to make a 1/4-inch hole. There's different ways to make a 1/4-inch hole. You could sort of maybe use some other device, whatever. But the job to be done is different from the product. And I think a lot of people miss that. And when you think about it from a jobs to be done lens, you think about other emotional benefits. So in our case, we were trying to measure outcomes in terms of math and literacy. But when I realized that wasn't really going to help us be successful, it forced us to come back and be like, no. The job to be done was to help this kid feel heard. And you may not actually put that. I probably wouldn't have started with that. I wouldn't have started with, let's help this kid feel heard. But when we think about it through the job to be done lens, it really reframes what the problem is and also how you solve it. And it allows you, I think, to come up with new ways to solve things that you may not have otherwise solved for or thought about. All right, so we have talked a little bit about product and how to design and how to build, and now let's talk about packaging for a second. So a long time ago, I went to a toy store. And every time we're around a toy store, I'll go into a toy store and say, hey, we make this thing. What do you think? Always trying to listen and get feedback. And I remember going into one toy store, and I was like, okay, here's what it does. Is this I think what I would ask is this the most educational product you've ever seen? I wanted to set the bar really high. And I remember one small specialty toy owner saying, no, it's not. She said, it's the second. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the first? And she said, a cardboard box. And for any of you that have kids, you know that kids love cardboard boxes. It's really apparent, right? They can do all these different things with them. They can color on them. They can get in them. They can turn them into forts. Cardboard boxes are literally the best thing for interactive play, and they are unbelievably great learning devices. So it got me thinking, again, go back to job to be done. How do we help a kid learn in a developmentally appropriate way? And we make an interactive product. And so a lot of people talk about think outside the box or whatever. And so I was thinking maybe we need to rethink the whole box. And you see this now today where folks will put designs or whatever on packaging to improve the experience. The job to be done might be to create an experience. But for us, what we did is we rethought the box. We made the box interactive. Because I wanted, if we're going to have a box, if we're going to make this really cool product, the box got to be cool too to be congruent. And so the lesson for us is really rethink the whole idea of a box. We thought about maybe not having a box, right? If we want to reach all kids and make it inexpensive and accessible, we thought about maybe we just don't have a box. But when we rethought the box and making it interactive, it allows us to do some things that we hadn't thought about. So for example, some people might ask, well, how do you know if a kid knows their letters or their numbers? Well, this makes it actually really easy to do, which was the one thing we couldn't necessarily demonstrate, and now we can demonstrate that. So that's the 8th lesson. Last couple lessons here. This one's really important, and I learned this the hard way. So again, a while ago, we were actually in stealth, and there was a reporter around town that was really aggressive with me, and was, she sent me all kinds of notes all over different places. I'm like, wow, at first I was like, wow, like I love her hustle. She's, and I'm like, I'm gonna throw her a bone. I'm gonna give her the first kind of interview or whatever. And I met with her and had a discussion and explained kind of like in depth what we're about. And she ended up writing this article about us. And I remember literally being in a meeting with a really important client of ours. And not even by the time I got home, I got a phone call from this client, and she had seen this. I hadn't even seen the article, and I pulled over, and she called me, and let me just show you what the article said. So it said, all right, the newest preschool teacher is a robot. Now this journalist was really, really well-intentioned, and I know she worked really hard, but that's probably the worst thing that she could have ever said about our product. So much so that I actually didn't do any more journalist interviews, podcasts. I turned them all down. So if someone out there asked me to do a podcast and I didn't do it, I'm sorry, but that's why. It just wasn't worth it for us. Couldn't take any chances for us to be perceived this way. And the interesting thing is that it was actually the opposite. And so not too long after that, we won the Moonshot Prize, Minnesota Cup Moonshot Prize for biggest breakthrough innovation. And the next article that we did, I was very clear about look, I'm not even interested in doing this if this is how you're thinking. And she ended up writing an article that used kind of the same picture, more or less, but with a very different, basically the opposite tagline. And I always thought that was interesting. But the bigger lesson here is that, you really control your brand and your story. And then there's one other thing here which I think is important, and it's about the power of voice. I had the opportunity to do a TEDx talk, and I had this amazing coach, Anna Maria, and she said to me, I think voice is the most powerful tool that we have to change the world, right? And that's really kind of the idea behind TEDx talks. And it really got me thinking because we're in voice technology, and I think she's right. And so I would say, not only do you control your story and your brand, but I think it's really important that you say it in your words, because that's what's gonna help people connect with you. And otherwise, you expose yourself to being misperceived, I think could have happened with this article. So that's one of the most important lessons that I've learned, and that's honestly why I spend time here and other places. I'm really about building relationships. We don't advertise. We don't. But I think if people hear kind of our story, they'll understand what we're trying to do, and I think be helpful. And we found that to be true. All right, so last thing here. You will fail a lot. I know we already know this. It's part of startup life. But one of the things that has been really surprising to me is, like I said, just putting in the hard work to build relationships. And about a year ago, we were invited to Colorado. We were part of it's called the FutureBound Summit. And what they did is they basically brought in kind of the most innovative early education companies. And it was probably one of the best experiences that I've ever been a part of, because when you get people with different experiences together, magic really happens. Someone recently told me, everybody has a lived experience that someone else needs to hear. And that this sort of event was that, because I didn't understand, for example, prenatal. That's part of early education. There's all these aspects of early education that we probably should be working together on. And what's interesting is we went through the summit, and it was totally magical. But I still stay connected with all of these folks, and some of the folks have. I'm just looking at the picture now. Lots of Techstars folks. Some folks have raised a lot of money. There's a Shark Tank company on there, but these are all just amazing folks, and we still stay connected. And some of the folks don't exist anymore. But the moral of the story, the lesson for me, is that you will fail a lot, but the key is to rebound together. And I've never actually shared this photo before because I don't like me just sort of standing here. But what's interesting, the irony is that in the back, it was called the FutureBound Summit. I'm not sure what the slogan was, but it says "Rebound Together." And maybe the photographer had that plan, but I certainly didn't see it. And it's just something I think about, because you'll fail a lot, all the time. And it's the best way to sort of get through failure is by really leaning on others that have been through those experiences, and I found that to be really helpful. So in closing, how to build an award-winning product without VC is really start with truth, find your will, believe in magic, design for joy, invert your thinking, really listen, solve the job to be done, rethink the box, speak your story, and of course, rebound together. And that's all I've got. So thank you for listening. It looks like I have 10 minutes, so I can either take questions or I can go get food. Yeah, what's your question?
Very quick question. So like in your presentation, you mentioned that you're a type A personality. So like you said that without explaining what that.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks for clearing that. So type A to me means like, I would say, I like to control my own destiny. I like to sort of create the path. And, you know, when my son was kicked out of preschool, I literally had no control. There was nothing I could do. I couldn't go to another early childhood place because they didn't have spots. I wasn't an expert in early education, so I couldn't help my son directly yet. It's just in my sort of adult life, I can't think of another time where I literally felt helpless. So that's what I meant by type A. So it was yeah.
Thank you. I have not heard about your product before, but I thank you for designing your product thoughtfully. And I have one question for you about, since it is powered with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, does your product protect children and kids from EMF radiation?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. I have looked into that, and we're always following the science. And you know, it's a very like nascent research. Like I would say, it's inconclusive in terms of like, is that if and how big of an impact is that? Because also, I think what we have to think about is what is the status quo. And right now, I think the research would show kids are spending, depends on age, but hours and hours and hours and hours in front of a tablet or a screen device. And so I think those are things that I think about. But to answer your question, I don't fully know, and I don't think anybody does. But it is something I think about. And I think what I would say is we're going to follow the research on what's best for kids and do whatever we can to be helpful. Thanks for bringing that up.
Thanks. Great presentation and a great product.
Thank you.
You obviously started this product with your own personal experience and your own personal need, and you were one person, yourself and maybe your wife.
Yeah.
I'd just be interested to know how you built your team. How did you find the people? Because you are, a group of people now, and was it friends and family? How did you network, and how did you find the people to help you take where you are now?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because there was a slide in here, and I wasn't sure how I would do on time, but I ended up removing it. But because this was going to be focused on product, I cut it out, but I'm glad you asked that. So ultimately, we have had so many helpers, and the lesson was going to be help the helpers. So I'll just mention a couple things. Mini demo. That was somebody that actually gave us some exposure, gave us a lot of good feedback early. Which, by the way, everybody should go to mini demo tonight if you haven't already planned for it. But Launch Minnesota is a part of DEED that actually gave us a grant. The grant allowed us to actually go make toy bots, which otherwise would have been harder to do because we make a physical product. It's easy to kind of build software and stuff, or easier. But when you have a physical product that has hard costs, it's a lot harder. So we're really grateful to have support from Launch Minnesota. And the last thing, and this is maybe one of the most important, is I see one of our former interns in the room. And I don't want to embarrass this person, but I remember going to this person and saying, you know what, hey. I don't know what I don't know, but here's where we're going, and I'd love the opportunity to kind of work with you, and here's what I can offer, and here's what I can't. And I was really honest with this person, and ultimately, this person ended up being the first employee at a company that's since gone public, and I think the experience that this person had with SayKid helped that person. And what makes me say that is now we've actually partnered with universities. And we've worked with dozens of students. And the slide that I had in here was going to show you all the places where they landed. So, Zoom and Twitter and Microsoft and Accenture and PwC and Slack. And these are all companies where SayKid alums have landed. And what we'll do is we have SayKid alums come back and talk to the current cohort. But what they learned, and what we often hear is that SayKid helped them kind of stand out. but also gave them the confidence to make something cool that they can feel proud of. And many of the students that we work with are underrepresented students in tech. We actually had an alum actually speak at a Twin City startup event about how she broke into tech. And so the lesson is, you're going to need a lot of help. But instead of sort of asking for help, I always think about, like, how can I be helpful? And starting with that. And so, like, I mentioned before self-determination theory, and I'm probably getting really long-winded on your question, but it's a really important question. I mentioned self-determination theory about ensuring that people have agency and feel confident and like they belong. So that's how we approach our kind of internship programs. We don't say, you're going to make this. We say, what would you like to make? Where do you want to go? How can we be helpful? And so they generally pick the product or the project. They decide it. It's almost always they will be like, I can't do it. I'm sorry, and I don't know anything about this. And I'm like, slow down, we'll help you. And we're really intentional about how we foster community. It doesn't always work, but it's worked enough that we've learned that something good is really happening. And so it's almost like a three-way win. Students get really valuable experience. We can develop additional sort of games and products and things like that. And the university gets to say, look at where our students are going. So yeah, that's kind of how we've grown the team in a really scalable, efficient way.
So I have a question. So obviously you do a lot of diligent research in the field. How do you do that research in determining what's good, what's not, and not get overwhelmed with everything that's available?
Yeah. Well, you asked the right way. How do you do all this research without getting overwhelmed? Because the thing is context matters. It's actually difficult. You would never be able to necessarily prove like that screens are bad. There's all kinds of research everywhere, but because they're all contextually dependent. And so it makes it really hard to do good research. And the other thing I would say is the things that are easiest to measure often aren't the most valuable, right? So we kind of obsess over math and literacy. But if you look at the research, a lot of the skills that actually help kids be successful in school and in life are things like empathy and a growth mindset and grit and creativity and all of these things, but they're really difficult to measure. And in fact, I don't know if I can say this yet. Well, first thing I'll say is we actually started as a way to sort of measure these hard-to-measure skills because they're all developed through back-and-forth interaction. So we have a way to actually be able to measure these hard-to-measure skills in a practical, scalable way. And the reason we didn't push forward on that is that I realized that it would cost us like $1 million to test and validate like one measure. And again, I'm like, oh my God, we're going to die. What's interesting, I think I can, it's not, I was just invited to meet with a foundation to explore this. So if I could have done anything, back then, I would have said, this foundation, it'd be great to work with you because we've got a way to do this. But they didn't know who we were, and recently this foundation's reached out to us. They're very big, and we hope to explore how we can better develop measures for these hard-to-measure skills. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like so yes and no. And again, there's no real good answers or clean answers because here's the thing. What we did is we looked at the science on what kids need to succeed. We looked at all of the skills. And then we looked at how kids need to feel and how kids need to think. They need to feel safe. They need to feel like they belong, right? And so you can solve those things. But an easy way to make it concrete is there are curriculums and there's standards. So for example, once we started to build a product, we started to build interactive experiences that map to these early learning standards. And that's how we tried to follow the science. But then also, I'll just say that those standards vary by kid. It's kind of like an oxymoron. You have a standard for a kid who has specific needs. And that's the conundrum that we have. Yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for coming to this chat. And if I can be helpful, here's my contact information. Thanks.